Hello. Welcome back. So I've been a little inconsistent with episode releases in the past month or so because I wanted to take a real break, like time off during the holiday. And then I got a very nasty, icky sinus cold that lasted for over 3 weeks. And the congestion and the coughing were like really terrible, really yucky, not ideal for speaking in a podcast. And then I sprained my shoulder and I could not, oh man, that was really fucking painful. I couldn't move my arm. So it's been a bit of a rough, the holiday was great, but it's been a bit of a rough start to the year. But I no longer sound muffled and phlegmy and I can now move my arm without pain. So here we are. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for being here. Weekly episodes will resume shortly again. So now I have some questions for you. Have you ever felt like the people in your life don't always understand who you are, what you try to tell them? Have you ever been told that you're too much or too sensitive or you think too much when you're just simply being yourself? And do you notice like an urgency or anxiety to correct people when they misunderstand you? And when someone minimizes or reinterprets your experience, do you get angry, feel angry, tense, or do you shut down? There's a specific kind of pain that comes from not being understood. It's rooted in being seen inaccurately, meaning being relationally mirrored back through distortion, through someone else's projections, their limitations, their unresolved traumas, and not by real acceptance and truth and pure unconditional love. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about the wound of feeling misunderstood when you feel like no one gets you, which contributes to the wound of feeling like your authentic self is never truly seen safely and accurately. And this particular wound, the wound of feeling misunderstood, it develops when your truth and your authenticity were consistently not reflected back to you without distortion. And that distortion is having your inner reality mirrored back to you through, again, someone else's limitations, their inability to actually perceive you as you truly are with unconditional love. And so when that happens early in your life repeatedly, your nervous system gets negatively conditioned by that. You don't just feel hurt and alone, you begin to question your own perception, and then that conditions you to over-explain yourself, to translate yourself when you don't need to defend yourself or what you think is your knowing, or to quiet certain parts of you in order to stay connected, to feel loved, to feel safe. And so this is all what I call the misunderstood or mirror wound. And you don't heal that wound through cognitive reassurance like positive self-talk or through gaining more insight or learning how to cope, because it lives below conscious thought and your conscious beliefs. That wound lives in your body's expectation that being misunderstood equals danger, equals erasure. So if you try to heal that wound at the surface level by like trying to change your thoughts or your mindset or trying to build more confidence in yourself or trying to like prove your intelligence through academic pursuits or career gains or whatever, you may feel better in the interim, but the conditioned pattern doesn't actually resolve. You don't actually heal the wound of being misunderstood, because the root of the wound is not that you are not good enough. It's that your original self was never mirrored back to you without distortion. Welcome to The Simple Source, a paradigm-shifting space where self-love, healing, spirituality, and personal growth are redefined. If you've been told healing takes years, that abundance must be attracted, or that transformation requires struggle, you haven't been told the truth. I'm Linda Villines, a certified trauma-informed holistic coach, author, and spiritual guide. After healing myself from chronic conditions, complex trauma, and lack, not by following traditional frameworks, but by creating my own, I'm now teaching you to love, heal, and free yourself, mind, body, and soul, so you can reclaim your highest health, happiness, and potential with joy and ease.
Each week, we go beyond surface-level self-help and into the real mechanics of transformation. If the traditional paths to healing and spirituality haven't produced the changes you want in the life you desire, you're in the right place. You were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. Let's get started with today's episode.
So in this episode, we're not talking about learning to be understood better. We're talking about restoring your pure perception of yourself, so you understand who you are without distortion. And also, we're going to unpack how to teach your nervous system that being misunderstood is no longer a threat to your existence. And that is when root level healing can begin. Now, personally, this is a wound that was present for most of my life for various reasons, but it formed because my parents carried a lot of unresolved trauma, still do. They lack emotional intelligence and maturity, attunement, and they were just constantly operating in survival mode. And so whenever I tried to show up as my authentic self or express myself in any real way, really, my expression and my authenticity was always reflected back to me through their own fears, their insecurities, their limitations, their unresolved traumas, their lack of emotional attunement, meaning I was not received as I truly was. I was received through the lens of their limiting beliefs, their fears, again, their lack of emotional intelligence and maturity, and their traumas. And so what they mirrored back to me, meaning how they responded to me, was not a true reflection of me. It was a distortion. So I never felt like my parents understood who I really was. And therefore that contributed to feeling and developing a subconscious belief that my authentic self is not safe, is not unconditionally loved. And so over time, that is traumatic because it shuts down the nervous system's ability to remain in fluid homeostasis, because you get stuck in hypervigilance or collapse or fawning because you're scared that you'll be shamed or rejected or abandoned or manipulated or unloved or punished simply by being in your truth, expressing your truth, showing up in your truth. And so last year, we're going to unpack more of that, what I just said throughout this episode, but back to myself for a minute. Last year, I had an emotional breakthrough. This is why I'm doing this episode. I had this emotional breakthrough during inner child work that led me to this understanding about what this wound is and about what's actually really at the core of it. I realized that my inner child wasn't just holding pain from not feeling loved or feeling protected. She was holding this original wound of not being understood, of not being perceived and received truthfully and reflected truthfully without any distortion. That's the key, without distortion. I realized that for my inner child's authenticity, which is her originality, what makes her special, right, and a treasure in her existence was never mirrored back to her without any distortion, like never. Or very rare, from the inner child view, there have obviously been people who have been able to mirror that to me as an adult, but the programming, the conditioning is not formed in adulthood. It's formed in early childhood attunement, which we're going to unpack later. And so that was a massive breakthrough moment for me, because then I could finally actually give her what she truly needed at the root, which was not just to be seen, but to be seen in the truth of her original, authentic, brilliant, rare, beautiful, incomparable self and soul, right? To be seen through source level unconditional love, not just my adult self's love, right? Not just like a corrective parent figure type of love in an imagined healing space, but to let her know that she has always been witnessed by source, meaning through the eyes of source divinity. And even though she may not have felt that she was being witnessed that way, that innately means that she has always been understood in her own divinity her whole life. And it was such a massive emotional release. because my body was able to let go of so much tension and bracing because I actually got to the core of the wound. We crave being witnessed purely, not just being seen. Those are different things, and we're going to again unpack this later. But we all crave being witnessed purely, meaning without distortion, by pure unconditional love, which is what Source is. And when we don't receive that in early attunement in childhood, when our brains are developing, when our subconscious is fundamentally being programmed, instead, when we are witnessed through conditional love or unhealthy unconditional love, which is, the foundation of codependency, meaning through distortion, then we never feel witnessed as our true selves. And it's important because we're also Source, right? Source is not separate from us. From the moment that we are born, we are fucking divine. And that doesn't mean that we need to be treated as like precious or superior. Hierarchy is another form of distortion. That just means that we innately crave to be known for what we truly are, to be witnessed purely, to see our divinity reflected back to us because we are relational beings, and relationships are mirrors, right? Everything in life is a mirror because our reality is just a projection of us. But relationships are the most potent mirrors because they're dynamic, they're piercing, they're a constant. So I want to talk more about the origin, like the nature of the misunderstood or the mirror wound, to help you understand more of the realization that I had and hopefully help you understand what this is in you so you can heal it as well. It essentially forms when your inner reality is consistently reflected back to you through someone else's limitations, right? Through their fear, their belief system, their conditioning, their emotional states, their emotional capacity, their unresolved traumas, their inability to accurately perceive you and receive you. And that's not a single misunderstanding. It's a foundational relational wound that develops when a child's authentic inner experience and purity of self, goodness of self, are not mirrored accurately by their early environment. So our nervous systems develop through attunement, meaning a child learns who they are, what they feel, and whether their perception is trustworthy by how consistently and accurately their internal states are reflected back to them by their caregivers. And when that reflection is clear and undistorted, accurate, and unconditionally loving in a healthy way, not in a transactional way, meaning not codependent, then the nervous system stabilizes. However, when it is distorted, the nervous system has to adapt to maintain a sense of safety and survival. And then when a child gets older, unfortunately, that mirroring is subject to more distortion because we live in global and systemic systems that normalize codependence, that normalized unresolved trauma, that reward conformity. And so it's not just families, it's schools, it's social structures. Even a lot of therapeutic models prioritize management over accuracy. And so when a child's way of perceiving or processing or knowing falls outside what the environment recognizes or deems normal, then that mirroring becomes filtered through distortion. And then over time, the child does not learn, I'm unseen. What specifically happens is they learn something like more destabilizing, which is something is wrong with me. My inner experience is unreliable. My way of knowing is not safe, is not lovable. And that experienced over and over and over again, of course, is going to trap the child in nervous system dysregulation whenever they want to be witnessed or to express themselves. And from a neuroscience perspective, that wound, the wound of being misunderstood, it's not a belief system. It's actually part of a learned prediction, meaning the nervous system associates authenticity with misattunement and then begins to prioritize self-monitoring, self-editing, self-correction in order to maintain safety and connection. And so that's why the misunderstood and mirror wound is so devastating when you don't heal it, because it warps your ability to feel safe in your own truth, because you are not responded to accurately, not in a way that actually meets your need to feel safe in your originality and authenticity. We are in a constant exchange. Anytime we talk to anybody, anytime we're in a relationship, it's a give and take. By default, it's an energetic exchange. So you are being received and you are being reflected. By nature, it happens naturally. And so that's why this wound is so universal, and also why it's so normalized, because so many people feel this. But when you are engaged with through someone else's fears and wounds, that teaches your mind-body system not just to doubt other people, but eventually to doubt yourself, because you're not being received and thus mirrored accurately. And that's important to understand, because you can't heal a wound that's rooted in distorted mirroring by trying to feel more confident, to make yourself more understandable, right? By conforming or shape-shifting or challenging yourself to be more expressive. The wound doesn't come from being silenced. That's a different wound. This wound, not feeling understood for who you are, came from being consistently misreflected. And that, yes, definitely lives in your nervous system. And now I want to talk about the difference between not feeling seen and feeling misunderstood. So when you feel unseen, you feel like there is a lack of mirror, because you were automatically dismissed, you were abandoned, you felt invisible, like no one was paying attention to you, like you were not making an impact, or you were not even allowed to be your true self due to rules or your family system or whatever. So you couldn't even show up in authenticity. You were invisible in your authenticity. However, when feeling misunderstood, there is a mirror, but that mirror reflects you inaccurately. So you are being seen, but you're not being seen with clarity. You're being seen through someone else's distortions. So that's the difference. I hope that makes that clear. And not being seen purely and truly, that does undermine your ontological safety, which is your nervous system's felt sense that your existence is coherent, is intelligible, and legitimate within your reality. So this is not about self-esteem. It's about whether your being makes sense in the world. And from a neurological standpoint, repeated mismirroring trains hypervigilance, meaning your brain learns to scan for misinterpretation. You become very sensitive to being corrected, right? You anticipate it. And then you mobilize quickly when your reality starts to feel misrepresented, right? And you're not doing that consciously. It's a survival adaptation. That's why you get angry, you feel hot, or you just shut down when you feel misunderstood, because that old trauma response is still firing from how it learned to adapt. And trauma responses here are over explaining, right? Trying to get people to really understand what you're saying, or translating yourself through an alternate lens to try to make more sense, and again, anticipating being misunderstood before it really happens, defending your perception, right? Just as a reflex before it was even contradicted, diminishing or editing your true expression or your true self, right? People pleasing, just all to preserve connection. And that none of what I listed are communication styles. They are not personality traits. They are nervous system survival strategies. And until your mind-body system experiences being reflected correctly, meaning without distortion, your nervous system will continue to brace no matter how much you try to show up in the world as your authentic self to be seen. Because again, the wound is not rooted in being seen. It's about being witnessed and having your true self reflected back to you with zero distortion, without being filtered, without being misshaped, misinterpreted, or limited. So hopefully in me sharing what I've realized about what I call the misunderstood mirror wound, I hope that that helps you understand something that you've experienced but haven't been able to name or identify. Because psychology comes close to naming this wound, but it doesn't actually name it. It doesn't fully capture it. The nearest concepts are misattunement or invalidation trauma, impaired mentalization. And those frameworks, they do describe the behavioral and emotional outcomes of being mismirrored, but they don't actually address the core distortion itself. They just focus on what happens after a person adapts to being inaccurately reflected, meaning they focus on how to manage feeling misunderstood, but not actually what happens within your mind-body system when your truth is consistently being returned to you in an altered way. And so the wound is not just cognitive, it's not just emotional. It disrupts your internal sense of what is real and trustworthy in your reality, not just emotionally, but at the level where your entire system decides what reality even is. And so that's why highly perceptive, sensitive, or visionary individuals often feel frustrated. Not because they're fragile or they doubt themselves, but because their way of knowing the world was consistently invalidated before it was ever mirrored back to them as true and real. For example, like a child who sensed tension between their parents, but was told, "It's okay, honey, everything's fine, mom and dad are fine." That doesn't just feel dismissive to the child. The child then starts to question their ability to read reality. And another example is someone who notices patterns, right? They feel subtle shifts, or they speak truthfully about what they observe. But then they're told they're overthinking, they're being dramatic, or they're imagining things. And then they learn that their perception is not safe to trust. Or it's like a person who expresses original ideas and then is just met with skepticism or confusion or correction. Now, here's another very important layer to understand regarding the misunderstood mirror wound. For many people with this wound, which is a lot of fucking people, the body learns something very specific, which is if my perception is questioned and I don't intervene, then I disappear. And that's called a pessimistic threat, which is feeling like your authority to know and perceive or interpret your reality is threatened. So when that forms early in life, your nervous system treats misunderstanding as dangerous, not just like a disagreement. And so that's why comments and corrections or reductions cause you immediate tension, right? Heat, bracing, performing, or shutting down. Not because you necessarily, again, lack self-confidence or you doubt yourself, but because your mind-body system learned to expect erasure. And all of that is important to understand because in doing inner child healing, those are all very overlooked aspects of this wound. Most inner child work is attempted from a dysregulated adult. That's the truth. Meaning the adult self tries to meet the inner child, but is still actually inside the same conditioned belief system, nervous system state that shaped the original wound or misattunement. So then the adult will offer the inner child comfort and reassurance, reframing, a sense of protection, love. But most people do that within the same emotional state as the wound, right? It's like the language, they expect the language to heal the inner child, the words, but that's not how you heal the inner child. What happens is if you're speaking to your inner child from the same emotional state as the wound, you just reinforce the wounding. It's not healing for your inner child. It's not productive for them. I actually did a whole episode about this called Adult Healing versus Inner Child Healing that you should listen to if you have not yet. So in regard to the misunderstood wound, this is, again, very important because otherwise you don't complete the resolution process. Because if your adult self is still operating from the original experience of being misunderstood, even if you're trying to be loving, even if you're well-intentioned with your inner child, you actually show up for your inner child still carrying distortion, essentially. Like you're still seeing them through the lens of how you were seen, not how they actually are. And I'll give you an example of this. So, imagine trying to comfort a child who's drawing outside of the lines, who's having difficulty coloring, and you say, it's okay, you're going to get better at coloring. Now, that may sound supportive, but it actually still assumes that coloring inside the lines is good, and what the child is doing by coloring outside the lines is bad. So then what gets mirrored to the child is distorted through the lens of what is deemed acceptable and unacceptable in that person. Does that make sense? And so what the child actually needed to hear, how they actually needed to be witnessed and reflected, is more along the lines of, you get to create however you want, and I see how you are coloring in your own beautiful, unique way. That is relational mirroring without distortion. Right? One's reassurance through distortion, but the other is recognition without distortion. Only the second one offers resolution to your inner child because it actually reflects your inner child's truth, not your adult adaptation. And so that is what pure original mirroring is. It honors the original being, the original experience, expression, and it does not conform it in order for you to be comfortable. You don't reassure your inner child, you reflect them back to themselves without distortion. And that is what allows your inner child to stop operating as a fragment of themselves inside a distorted relational field. They, she, if I'm talking about my inner child, they can then reconnect to their original self, signal, frequency, their originality, before adaptation, before translation, before self-editing. And of course, then that allows your nervous system to release stored emotions around being and feeling misunderstood. And that means, this is emotional, right? All true healing is emotional, period. There's no question about that. And so what happens then is the held tension of being compressed, essentially, in your truth is released. Right? And that stored adaptive conditioning in your body that formed when misunderstanding became a baseline expectation can also then relax. Again, misunderstanding, consistent, distorted mirroring, being misunderstood, that's not just an annoying experience. It became a predictive model of reality in your nervous system, right? A conditioned response to a certain type of perceived danger. And so what your inner child, what your system needs is not more insight, not more reassurance. They need to receive accurate recognition that is delivered and felt in your body, right? Without cognitive interpretation or translation. That is what resolves the wound, because your nervous system does not resolve and release wounds through explanation, right? It resolves them when an old trauma response is basically proven unnecessary in your present day lived experiences. And so once that happens consistently enough to become new conditioning, that's when your system no longer has to brace around being understood. So now I want to unpack what being witnessed without distortion really means so that you can do this for yourself. First of all, being witnessed is not the same thing as being seen. I want to make this very clear. Being seen is perceptual, okay? Being witnessed in this context is accurate reflection. So in developmental neuroscience, the nervous system organizes itself through feedback, meaning it learns who it is and whether it is safe to exist by how precisely its internal states are mirrored by another. So when that mirroring is accurate, the nervous system stabilizes. It feels safe. When it is consistently distorted, even subtly, it does not have to be overt because that is how sensitive your system is. Then the nervous system adapts by bracing, by translating, by self-editing. And so that's why consistent mirrored accuracy matters more than consistent attention. Because unresolved trauma is so prevalent, it's so normalized that people in the external world are just reflecting us through filters like expectation, trauma conditioning, roles, projections, fears, and that kind of reflection that we are so commonly subjected to is inverted. Meaning the mirror, whether it's a person or an aspect of society or culture, reflects itself back to you. And in doing so, it reshapes your original signal to fit itself, right? Does that make sense? So accurate witnessing actually does the opposite. It reflects the original signal, which is you as you are, without reinterpretation or without meaning making, and definitely without making itself more comfortable. So when you are finally mirrored without that inversion, without external projection or judgment, that's a big one. That is when your nervous system can complete that unresolved threat loop that has been ongoing in you since early development, because your nervous system doesn't register accurate witnessing as validation, right? It registers it as truth confirmation. That truth confirmation changes you in a way that being reassured never can. Because again, it's not about being seen. It's about being witnessed in your truth and having that truth reflected back to you truthfully, purely. So you can think of it this way. In regard to the misunderstood wound, you don't need to feel better about yourself. You need your truth, your reality, your originality affirmed. Not to be like, it's okay, right? You don't need reassurance. It's not the like, whatever you think about your reality is okay. That's not mirroring. You need it accurately reflected back to you as I see you, and I'm going to reflect back to you exactly how you are. It's not that who you are is okay. Those are two different things. And so that's when the wound can heal, because the wounded belief that your existence requires permission to be true, that's what begins to dissolve at the root level where it was first formed, when you are mirrored accurately. And from a biological perspective, that's the resolution of the predictive maladaptation, because your nervous system gets to update its model of reality from my existence cannot be received without distortion to I can exist truthfully without distortion. And from a spiritual perspective, that is the restoration of a certain type of coherence. I mean, original coherence, really, being reflected without separation between your essence and your expression, meaning your essence as source and your expression as source. You're divine. At your essence, you are pure, unconditional love. And thus, you deserve to have that reflected back to you in your reality as you express yourself. That is so necessary, and no one talks about that. So when you heal the wound of being misunderstood, then your system no longer organizes around proving or explaining or obtaining legitimacy. It can then reorganize around presence, because you don't just feel validated. You no longer require validation on a fundamental level because you have been mirrored back your true essence. And again, you cannot heal this wound by understanding it or talking about it or journaling about it. The wound lives in your nervous system, in your body. And so the patterns shaped by that wound that result in over-explaining and self-editing or shutting down, those are not cognitive patterns. They are part of your procedural memory, right? Your nervous system's automatic predictions about safety and survival. And those predictions are encoded in your autonomic reflexes, your muscle tone, your impulses, how you unconsciously narrow your focus. And none of that is mindset. None of that is belief in the traditional definition. It's really biology. It's really part of your subconscious programming that governs your automatic physiological patterns and behavior. And so healing the wound requires that level of reprogramming, and that level of reprogramming does not happen through seeking insight or using affirmations or developing more self-control. It happens when that old predictive pattern is contradicted in real time, meaning while your mind-body system remains regulated. So not only do you have to give yourself accurate mirroring by reconnecting to the fact that you are source embodied, but you've got to practice that, not just cognitively, but somatically. The experience of my perception can be misunderstood and nothing collapses. That somatic learning cannot be talked into your body, meaning you cannot convince your body of that by talking about the experience. It has to be lived, emotionally real, and experienced in your body. Now, to be clear, this wound also does not resolve through emotional catharsis or just like talking about your past over and over again to just unpack another layer. It resolves when your nervous system is allowed to feel that wound activate, and then you meet it with felt safety without forcing that safety. That means you do not coerce your body to relax. You provide the conditions for your body to feel safe when that old trigger or feeling of being misunderstood surfaces. So I hope you do invest in healing this wound, because it's so much more common than people realize, because the world is not neutral. Most adults are walking around being steered by their wounded inner child. And, many people are showing up in life as their wounded false selves. Many people are carrying decades of unresolved trauma and fears. But when you heal this wound, what naturally happens is you stop engaging with people who distort your perception. You stop explaining what is clear to you. You stop being attracted consciously or unconsciously to situations that challenge the legitimacy of your knowing. People either meet you in clarity or they fall out of your life, right? Without drama. Not because you became a better communicator, but because literally your field and your reality are no longer orienting around distortion to know and resolve itself. And to be clear, at the core, this wound is not I'm unlovable or I'm unsafe or I'm not enough. Those are different wounds. This is the wound of the truth of who I am has not been reflected back to me truthfully. So my perception of my original self is distorted, and I must then defend my reality so I don't disappear in someone else's. That's the wound. And that's not a mindset issue. It's a pessimistic survival issue. It's a pessimistic survival issue. And you do not heal that by proving your intelligence or refining your communication style. You heal it by no longer bracing for distortion, because your system knows that you can hold yourself in your truth. You don't need external confirmation, even though it's a necessary thing that we all crave. But it's essentially you reclaiming your truth, your source self, and that source has always been witnessing you as itself. It's about restoration of your original coherence. And so original mirroring, being reflected with total accuracy without projection or reduction, is this layer of healing that so many frameworks just overlook completely. Most frameworks aim for safety, self-love, which is great, integration, which is great, but so many of them just completely overlook how important it is to be reflected in one's undistorted essence, because we're relational beings. We don't exist in isolation. We are mirrored constantly. It's fundamental to how reality works. And yet, for so many of us, our relationships do not reflect us truthfully, meaning we are not reflected through pure love. We are being reflected through some level variation of distortion. And that's a cause of so much unnamed pain and suffering and relational dissatisfaction and conflict. Because yes, it is a need, right? That has been largely unnamed, but it is a primal need nonetheless. And so I hope that this episode helps you get that need met. So here's your action step for the week. The next time that you feel misunderstood, whether someone said something, made a comment, it was a tone, it was a misread, I want you to pause. Do not clarify, defend, correct. Do not over-explain. Instead, I want you to tune into yourself. Put your hands on your body. Take a deep breath from your belly. Orient to yourself and tell yourself silently, I am still here. my truth remains intact. And then I want you to allow your body to let go of some of that tension, 10%, 20%, instead of bracing. Choose presence, choose to breathe, and then return to the situation with that level of self-regulation and self-honoring. And if you do that over and over again, it does interrupt that predictive loop where your trauma response kicks in, right? Which, would just then reinforce that original wound. But if you stay present without forcing undistorted reflection, right? You're not being like, I need you to do this for me. And if you don't do it, I'm going to reinforce this wound. And if you stay present without forcing your nervous system to calm down, it then learns that misunderstanding no longer equates to danger or erasure. And that is when you can exist as your true self with less external and internal contradiction. And eventually, when you get to a place of like, I give zero shits if I make sense to you, and when you get to a place where your understanding of yourself is primary, not just mentally, but emotionally true and real in your body and in your nervous system, that is when your energy and your whole mind, body, soul system are truly free to shine and thrive, because you're no longer contending with the need for your reality to be reflected back in the way that is real and true for you. You can just start living what is real and true for you without hesitation, without defending, embracing, and explaining. Just freedom to be your original, authentic, divine, brilliant, and beautiful self. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this episode awakened you, inspired you, and reminded you of what's possible when you love, heal, and free yourself and reclaim your highest truth and power. If this show has transformed or enlightened your self-love, growth, and healing journey, please like, save, and share this episode, and leave a positive review on Apple or Spotify. And subscribe to be reminded of new episodes. Your support is deeply appreciated and truly helps this show so much. And if today's episode resonated with you, don't stop here. Go deeper. My book, Unconditional, You Are Perfect As You Are, expands on these teachings and gives you the missing framework about self-love that no one is talking about. So get your copy today to start reading and loving yourself more. And if you're ready for the ultimate healing journey with daily instruction and guidance from me, I'd love to see you inside the Source membership, the only holistic and comprehensive step-by-step self-healing program that is proven to work. Remember, you were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. It's time to claim everything you want and more. All the links are in the show notes. I'll see you next time.